You wake up, make decisions, reply to messages, choose your words, create plans. You feel in control, as if you're consciously, rationally steering your life. But what if all of this is just a surface-level performance? What if most of what you do, feel, and think is actually shaped by internal forces you don't even know exist? This is the first wound Carl Jung's thought inflicts on us. Consciousness is just the tip of the iceberg. You live as if you're awake, but act as if you're dreaming. And the most dangerous part, you believe you're in command, when in reality you're being led, like a puppet who thinks it pulls its own strings. The truth is, you don't make free choices in life. You react to it through patterns you don't even know are there. The idea that we are conscious beings, endowed with free will and in charge of our own story, is a comforting illusion. But comfort is not truth. Jung dedicated his life to showing that the human psyche is like an inner theater, where hidden characters, traumas, complexes, symbols, fears, shadows, fight for the spotlight in every action, thought, and relationship. And you, believing yourself to be the playwright, are often just following a script you never wrote. The unconscious is not a flaw of the mind. It is the foundation, the structure, the very ground on which your awareness stands without even realizing it. While you live on autopilot, the unconscious writes your story in between the lines. Jung said the unconscious is not merely a storage room for forgotten memories. It is active, creative, autonomous. It dreams, sabotages, repeats, protects, hides. It operates behind every choice you rationalize after the fact. You say, I like this, but don't know why. You say, I don't trust this person, but can't explain the instinct. You say, I don't know why I do this, and that is the phrase that reveals the unconscious's power, because every time you act against your own will, every time you repeat what you swore you wouldn't, every time you feel something you can't explain, it's the unconscious that's in control. Consciousness is small, very small. Jung compared the mind to a vast cave, where consciousness is just the light of a candle. The rest is shadow, darkness, uncertainty. And the problem is not the darkness. The problem is that you believe it doesn't exist. The ego, this shallow I you feed and protect every day, thrives on denial. It doesn't want to know about repressed pain, internal contradictions, or ambiguous impulses. It wants to feel right, coherent, clean. But the psyche doesn't work like that. When you deny a part of yourself, it doesn't disappear. It just gets repressed. It moves into the basement of your soul, and from there, it starts ruling your life without you realizing. What is repressed becomes dangerous because it acts in the dark, outside the reach of reason. And here lies the tragedy. The unconscious doesn't hate you, but it doesn't protect you either. It simply repeats. It records patterns, creates defenses, develops masks, and then acts based on them. If you were abandoned, rejected, humiliated, the unconscious builds a survival system. Even when your life gets better, keeps running. It keeps making decisions, keeps sabotaging relationships, destroying opportunities, undermining your joy, all to maintain internal coherence. The unconscious prefers familiar pain over uncertain freedom. That's why you repeat. That's why you suffer. That's why you feel trapped inside yourself. Carl Jung gives us a powerful but painful key. Everything you refuse to see continues making decisions for you. Everything you hide, repress, ignore, returns. It comes back as failure, addiction, illness, chronic dissatisfaction, and the more you deny it, the stronger it gets. Jung said, make the unconscious conscious, or it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's one of the most brutal lines in deep psychology, because it robs you of the comfort of external blame. From that moment on, you can't say, life screwed me. You are forced to look within and admit that maybe you are your own saboteur. In this video, you'll dive deep into the depths of the unconscious. You'll discover how it forms, how it acts, how it controls you, and how it can be confronted. This is not content for those seeking quick answers. It's a plunge for those brave enough to look, because only those who look can change. Only those who see can break free. Only those who walk through their pain can finally come home to themselves. The unconscious is in control, but maybe, just maybe, that can change starting now. The unconscious doesn't appear out of nowhere. It is born within you, before you even know what you means. As an infant, your mind cannot distinguish between what it feels and what it is. It can't filter, question, or analyze. Everything is absorbed, everything is recorded. Love, pain, rejection, absence, every gesture, every glance, every silence enters you as raw programming. And the cruelest part, that programming never disappears. Carl Jung understood something that goes far beyond traditional psychology. The unconscious is shaped by childhood, but continues to operate as if time never passed. While you grow on the outside, your emotional system stays frozen on the inside. Everything you lived or avoided becomes a pattern, an invisible script, an emotional algorithm that guides you, even decades later. Childhood is not just a stage, it's the mold. Imagine your mind as soft clay during your early years. Every word heard, every silent trauma, every failed attempt to be loved, it all leaves marks. And those marks you carry to this day, but most of it you don't remember, because the unconscious doesn't work with clear memories. It works with sensations, with triggers, with unexplained tensions that come out of nowhere and take over your body, your voice, your anger. You don't know why you explode, why you shut down, why you feel fear, but all of it was programmed before you even had words to describe it. Jung understood that human development begins with repression. The child quickly learns that certain behaviors are accepted, others not. She notices that when she screams too much, she is rejected. When she shows anger, she is punished. When she cries, she might be ignored. Gradually, she begins to hide parts of herself to survive, and those hidden parts, the feelings, desires, and impulses that weren't allowed to exist, don't disappear. They sink into the psychic basement, and there they become what Jung called repressed unconscious content. Everything that could not be lived continues asking to live, and that plea shows up as crisis, sabotage, addiction, fear, compulsion, repetition. You don't remember most of it, and that's exactly where the danger lies. What isn't remembered can't be questioned. What isn't seen can't be healed. What has no name holds power. The unconscious begins as a collection of fragmented experiences, unprocessed emotions, parts of the soul exiled to protect the forming ego. It's as if your true self was pushed into the depths of a chest, while an edited version of you was built to please others. And now, you live that version. A self that doesn't know who it is, because it was created to be accepted, not to be authentic. Childhood is also the birthplace of complexes, another central concept in Jung's work. A complex is like a nucleus of unresolved emotional energy, a psychic cluster that lives within you, waiting for a chance to take over. For example, if you were constantly criticized, a complex of inadequacy forms. And even as an adult, this complex makes you feel small in front of any authority figure. You don't think, I'm being dominated by an unconscious pattern from childhood. No, you think, I'm just not good enough. The complex disguises itself as logical thought, and that's how it dominates you, without you even knowing. Jung claimed that all unintegrated childhood content becomes destiny. What was lived without awareness returns as pattern. You begin repeating the same mistakes, attracting the same kinds of relationships, avoiding the same types of situations, all because the unconscious, still operating from your original wounds, prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom. The unconscious is conservative. It wants to avoid pain, not seek truth. It acts out of protection, not out of liberation. And until you question what was recorded in there, you will remain a prisoner of events you don't even remember living. But there's something even deeper. The unconscious doesn't just record what happened, it interprets. It assigns meaning, often distorted, to what occurred. For instance, a father's absence might be interpreted as, "I'm unworthy of love." A mother's criticism might register as, "I'm a mistake." These interpretations become silent beliefs that shape everything you feel, do, and decide. And here's the brutal truth. The unconscious doesn't care about objective truth. It runs on unchallenged emotional truths. And it is those truths that drive your life without your awareness. All of this leads to a brutal conclusion. Your childhood is not in the past. It's still operating right now. It's there in how you handle conflict, in your fear of rejection, in your need to please, in your struggle to trust, in your urge to disappear when things go wrong. You may be 30, 40, 50 years old, but if you've never looked at those roots, you are still living as the child who wasn't seen, heard, or protected. And until that child is welcomed within you, the adult will keep sabotaging himself, believing he's making choices, when in reality he's only reacting to wounds buried long ago. Carl Jung offers a clear call. Go back to the origin. Go back to where you stopped being whole. Because only those who have the courage to look at childhood with true eyes, without romanticism, without denial, without excuses, can begin to reclaim control of their own lives. The unconscious was born back then, but it only loses its power when you decide to be born again, now, with consciousness. There's a force inside you that doesn't appear in the mirror, a part of your soul you hide, even from yourself. A psychic entity shaped by everything you've repressed, denied, rejected, cast out, because it seemed wrong, ugly, shameful, or inappropriate. Carl Jung gave this force a simple, direct, and devastating name: the shadow. But don't be mistaken. The shadow is not a poetic metaphor. It is real, alive, active. And more than that, it watches you in silence, waiting for the right moment to act. Because everything denied by the conscious mind seeks expression through the unconscious. And the shadow is exactly this collection of impulses, wounds, instincts, and desires that you never had the courage to own, but that still live within you, ready to take over the moment you let your guard down. You think you're rational, civilized, kind, ethical, but all it takes is a trigger, a sharp look, a sudden rejection, an unexpected humiliation, and something dark, primal, furious erupts inside you. That's the shadow rising. Jung said the ego, the image you have of yourself, is just a mask you wear to deal with the world, but who you truly are includes what you pretend not to feel. It includes envy, pride, guilt, fear, the thirst for revenge, and self-sabotage. And the tragedy is, the more you repress, the stronger it becomes. What you refuse to see grows in the dark. What you reject begins to control you from behind the curtain. The shadow is born the moment a child realizes they cannot be everything, that in order to be loved, they must cut themselves down, hide their anger, their jealousy, their wildness, their intensity. Slowly, they begin to carve themselves into a shape acceptable to others. But those parts don't disappear. They pile up in the unconscious, like living pieces of your soul that were left behind. And the more moralistic, rigid, or perfectionist you become, the more dangerous your shadow is, because it doesn't dissolve with pretty quotes or sheer willpower. It wants to live, and if it can't live consciously, it will find a way, in your addictions, your outbursts, your irrational choices. Have you ever wondered why you keep making the same mistakes even when you know they'll hurt you? Why you attract people who wound you? Why you sabotage the very moments that could finally work out? That's shadow. The shadow doesn't think, it acts. It acts as the violent return of what you refuse to integrate. Jung warned, the bigger the ego, the bigger the shadow. That means the more convinced you are that you're good, pure, just, and righteous, the more your shadow grows in silence. Because the psyche doesn't seek perfection, it seeks wholeness. And wholeness only comes when you're willing to look within and admit that yes, you are also made of what you condemn. The shadow shows itself in many ways, sometimes in rage that feels out of proportion, sometimes in thoughts you pretend you don't have, in desires you repress even from yourself, in cutting remarks that slip out, in patterns of humiliation you repeat, in addictions you secretly feed. It also appears in dreams, in frightening figures, chases, symbolic scenes that expose what you avoid feeling while awake. And perhaps the most perverse expression, it shows up in others. Yes, you project your shadow onto those around you. That kind of person you can't stand might just be acting out the part of you you refuse to acknowledge. What disturbs you in others is often what's hidden inside yourself. But there's something deeper still. The shadow isn't only negative. It also contains your power, your creativity, your sensuality, your courage, your instinct, your wild and vital brilliance. Because in order to be accepted, you also learn to hide your strength, to lower your voice, to pretend you don't care, to smile when you wanted to scream, to stay silent when you wanted to say enough, and all that censored power became shadow too. Jung said the shadow contains 90% pure gold, but to access that gold, you must enter the cave. You must descend to where you never wanted to go. You must face what scares you most and realize that's you too. Integrating the shadow isn't an intellectual exercise, it's a confrontation, a brutal, slow, dangerous process, but absolutely necessary. It requires humility, silence, honesty. It requires you to stop justifying, stop comparing, stop pretending. It requires you to look in the mirror and say, I am not only light, I am everything. And in that everything, there is something real. Because as long as you try to look perfect, you'll be fragile. As long as you deny your shadow, you'll be controlled by it. But when you include it, when you listen to it, when you know it, it stops dominating you. It becomes energy, clarity, direction. And you stop being divided and become whole. Carl Jung said the path to healing runs through darkness. That true awakening doesn't come through light and mantras, but through the courage to walk through your inner hell with your eyes wide open. And the shadow is that hell, not because it is evil, but because it was forgotten. And everything that is forgotten comes back starving to exist. If you don't integrate your shadow, you'll keep sabotaging yourself, blaming the world, running from yourself. But if you dare to look it in the eye, without judgment, without defense, without fear, then maybe, for the first time in your life, you'll stop being a character and become a living soul. You think you know people. You believe you understand who irritates you, who disappoints you, who inspires you, who hurts you. But what if all of this is just a reflection of what lives inside you? What if the world, and especially the people you most connect with or most clash against, are nothing but psychic mirrors, projecting back what you don't want to face within yourself? Carl Jung was surgical when he said, "What you do not want to know about yourself ends up appearing in others." That sentence changes everything. Because it reveals one of the most brutal and liberating laws of deep psychology. What you condemn, chase, admire, or hate may not be on the outside. It's in your unconscious, and you projected it, like a masked shadow, onto the other. Projection is one of the oldest and most unconscious defense mechanisms of the mind. Instead of facing what's painful, ugly, or shameful in ourselves, we throw it onto others. We see arrogance in others, when it's our own insecurity speaking. We see deceit, when we're the ones hiding behind masks. We see weakness, when we're the ones terrified of failing. The unconscious mind cannot bear to hold certain contents alone, so it dumps them outward as emotional reflections, and the world, unknowingly, becomes a stage for our unresolved inner dramas. But it doesn't stop there. Projection also operates on the luminous aspects you refuse to recognize in yourself. When you idealize someone, when you feel like that person is everything you wish you could be, when you feel blind admiration, that's projection too. Jung said, "We project both our light and our shadow," meaning you also refuse to see your own greatness, your strength, your sensuality, your intelligence, your creative power. So you throw it onto someone else and place them on a pedestal. But that brilliance you see out there is yours too. And until you claim it, you'll remain trapped in emotional dependency, disguised as love, friendship, or inspiration. Projection has a dangerous trap. It makes you believe the problem is always someone else. You say, "I can't stand lazy people, I hate cold people, I despise liars," without realizing that what irritates you might also live within you. Sometimes it's because you are that way too. Other times, it's because you've forbidden yourself from being that way and unconsciously envy those who dare to break the rules you repressed. That's why, every time you feel an intense emotional reaction towards someone, whether it's admiration or repulsion, ask the most uncomfortable question there is. What exactly about this person is showing me something that belongs to me? Jung saw projections as the root of many toxic relationships. Because when you project your shadow onto someone, you begin to see them as the problem. You feel betrayed, wronged, rejected, without realizing you're actually confronting a part of yourself. It's like arguing with a mirror and expecting the reflection to change so your image looks better. But the mirror only reflects, the other only reveals. You're not really seeing who that person is. You're seeing what they awaken in you. And what they awaken says far more about you than it does about them. This dynamic also explains why certain relationships become explosive, because when two shadows meet, they ignite. It's as if two dormant volcanoes begin reacting to each other. Wounds touch, triggers ignite, complexes clash, and you get stuck in a cycle of blame, guilt, and pain, without realizing you're dealing with parts of yourself projected onto someone else's body. Love then becomes a battlefield, because you don't love the other for who they are. You love them for the symbolic role they play, filling the void you didn't dare to face. But not everything is tragedy. Jung also believed that projections are golden opportunities, because what disturbs you or fascinates you has something to teach you about yourself. Every time you're irrationally irritated, every time you feel magnetized by someone you barely know, every time you experience a deep rejection, it's your unconscious trying to speak. The mirror is revealing itself. And if instead of reacting, you look inward and ask, "Why does this affect me so much?" you open a door, the door of self-analysis, of expansion, of individuation. Because only by withdrawing projections do you begin to see the world and yourself clearly. But beware, withdrawing a projection hurts, because it means recognizing that the other was not the villain, nor the savior. They were just a reflection, and you, the whole time, were standing in front of yourself and refused to see. The humility that comes from this realization is brutal. You feel exposed, fragile, disoriented, but at the same time, free. Because with every projection you reclaim, a piece of your true self returns home. And slowly, you stop reacting. You stop depending. You stop repeating. Because now you know what is yours and what is not. In the end, the journey inward is made of mirrors. Mirrors that irritate you, that enchant you, that frighten you. But they're all saying the same thing. Look, really look. Not at the other, but at what they awaken in you. Because when you stop projecting, you begin to integrate. And when you begin to integrate, you stop being a distorted reflection and become a whole being, an awakened being, a being who can see the world without getting lost inside it. Have you ever found yourself reacting in a way that feels completely out of proportion, like something took over you that you couldn't control? Have you ever said, I don't know what came over me. Or I didn't want to do that, but it was stronger than me. Well, it was. Carl Jung described these psychic ruptures with a term as simple as it is threatening: complex. A complex isn't just a bundle of thoughts, it's a living entity inside your psyche. It's an emotional, reactive, memory-charged part of you that activates when you least expect it. And in that moment, it takes over your life. Contrary to popular belief, a complex is not a weakness or a flaw. It's an autonomous, energetic structure that lives within you. Think of it as a psychic bubble filled with emotion, story, image, and impulse. It's born from an unhealed emotional wound, and it stays there lurking. You can live years in peace, but when something hits the right button, a tone of voice, a dismissive look, an unexpected absence, the complex takes the wheel. And you stop acting like an adult. You respond like the wounded, rejected, humiliated child who's still frozen in the time of pain. Jung once said, "Complexes are the thieves of the soul." And he was right. Because while you believe you're making conscious choices, the complex is pulling strings behind the scenes, like a virus in the system. It shapes your behavior, your reactions, your desires, your fears. The inferiority complex, for example, doesn't just make you feel small. It makes you self-cancel, apologize for existing, doubt every step. The abandonment complex creates relationships where you cling desperately, accept crumbs, erase yourself just to avoid being left. And none of this is rational. It's emotional, it's unconscious, it's automatic. A complex behaves like a subpersonality. It's as if a version of you, frozen in a specific trauma, lives inside, waiting. And this version appears unannounced. You might be in a professional meeting and suddenly feel humiliated by a harmless comment. You might be in a healthy relationship and suddenly spiral into panic over a brief silence. You might be on the brink of success and suddenly sabotage everything out of fear. The complex doesn't need your permission to act. It just needs a trigger. And once it's triggered, you're pulled into a mode of being you didn't choose, but that completely dominates you. The most dangerous part is that complexes don't operate only inside you. They choose each other in relationships. Someone with an abandonment complex often attracts someone with a rejection complex. Someone with a control complex seeks out someone with a submission complex. It's as if traumas recognize each other and lock in. They form destructive dynamics that look like love, but are just repetition. And no matter how painful it gets, you keep going back to the same pattern. Not because you're stupid, weak, or naive, but because there's something inside you that hasn't been seen, named, or healed. Jung taught that the path to liberation is not to defeat the complex, but to integrate it. That means recognizing this sub-personality's existence and talking to it, understanding where it came from, what it's trying to protect, what it still feels. It's a process of deep listening. You don't fight the complex, you bring it into the light. You hold its hand and say, "I know where you came from. I see your pain, but now I'm an adult. I can take care of us." And that new posture slowly disarms the emotional bomb that always explodes when you feel threatened. It's also important to understand the complex is not your enemy. It's the unconscious trying to protect you. It formed at a time when you didn't have the tools to process certain pains, so it built mechanisms: withdrawal, control, rage, dependence, and those mechanisms worked for a time. But now they imprison you, because what once saved you in childhood now sabotages you in adulthood. The complex is the scream of the wounded part that never had a voice, and now hijacks you whenever something reminds it of the original trauma. But you can be bigger than that. You can create inner space to recognize, this is mine, but it is not me. And here's the deepest truth. Every deactivated complex becomes recovered power, because within that psychic structure lived vital energy, frozen emotion, raw strength. And when you can sit with that pain, instead of fleeing from it, you reintegrate. You stop fragmenting, and the more you integrate, the more whole you become. Jung said the psyche is self-regulating, and that what hurts is exactly what needs to be welcomed, because there is no freedom without awareness, and no awareness without confrontation. So the question is, who's living your life when you're not present? Who makes your decisions? Who ruins your good moments? Who appears right at the edge of your transformation? Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's a complex. But the moment you recognize that, something shifts. You start stepping out of autopilot. You start noticing. You start choosing. And in that sacred space between the trigger and the response, between the impulse and the action, between the wound and the awareness, your real freedom begins. The unconscious doesn't speak with words. It doesn't argue, doesn't persuade, doesn't shout. It whispers. And those who are always rushing, distracted, sleepwalking through life don't hear it. But the signs are everywhere. A strange dream that repeats, an absurd coincidence that feels tailor-made, a sudden urge to leave, even when everything seems fine, a wave of nausea with no medical cause, a panic attack at the peak of happiness, a self-sabotage that strikes the exact moment you're about to succeed. These are not system errors. They are messages, attempts from the unconscious to communicate with you because the soul wants to emerge, and when it's not heard, it screams in silence. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to decoding these invisible signals, and one of the most fascinating concepts he developed was synchronicity. Unlike causality, where one event directly causes another, synchronicity is when two seemingly unrelated events occur with such significance that you feel this isn't random. It's as if reality is responding to something inside you, as if the unconscious extends outward and uses the world itself as a mirror. A book that finds you at the right time, a song that says exactly what you feel. An unlikely encounter that changes everything. For Jung, these events are symbolic dialogues between you and the totality of life. But the unconscious also speaks through dreams, not in a literal way, but symbolically. A dream is not a mystical warning or a meaningless fantasy. It's a visual expression of your soul, trying to be heard. While you sleep, the unconscious gains freedom. It builds scenes, characters, settings, all with one goal: to show you what's hidden. That's why dreams are often uncomfortable, disturbing, chaotic, because psychic truth isn't always beautiful. A dream about death may symbolize transformation. A dream about being chased may reveal a part of you that you deny. A dream of falling may reflect an unconscious fear of losing control. The question to ask isn't, what does this mean? But rather, what is this trying to show me about myself? And there is another kind of signal, more cruel, more frequent, more ignored: repetition. You repeat patterns because you haven't yet understood what needs to be learned. The unconscious repeats until you listen. Relationships that start and end the same way. Dreams that almost come true but always collapse. Cycles of scarcity, betrayal, abandonment. The same script with different actors. That's not bad luck. It's psychic programming. And unless you have the courage to look inward and ask, why do I need to live this again? The pattern will continue. Stronger, harsher, more invasive. Then come the addictions, but not just the obvious ones. Alcohol, smoking, drugs, food, sex. Jung pointed to emotional addictions, people addicted to control, to pleasing others, to playing the victim, to saving everyone, to staying constantly busy just to avoid feeling, to chasing impossible relationships just to confirm their own sense of rejection. All of these are unconscious strategies to avoid facing the original wound. You numb it, repeat it, distract from it, but the pain stays, and every addiction is a desperate attempt to escape the hole you carry, but the hole doesn't disappear, and the addiction becomes a cage. The body speaks too, because the unconscious lives in the body. The pain in your chest when you need to stand up for yourself, the tightness in your throat when you want to speak the truth, the tension in your gut when you need to say no, the allergic reactions that appear for no medical reason, the illnesses triggered by emotional weight. The body is the stage where the unconscious performs its unresolved scripts. Ignoring it is like silencing a fire alarm. The fire still burns. You can pretend everything is fine, but your body will keep screaming what your mind refuses to feel. Jung saw all of this as invitations to consciousness. There are no random signs. There is a symbolic intelligence operating beneath the surface of reality, a deep wisdom trying to wake you up. But to hear it, you must be willing to pause, to feel, to listen. Because as long as you live on the surface, chasing distractions, logical explanations, social justifications, the unconscious will keep operating in the dark, and you'll keep reacting, suffering, repeating, without knowing why. The question that must guide this part of your journey is brutal and liberating. What in me is creating this? What in me is attracting this type of person, this type of situation, this type of failure? This is not about blame. It's about psychic responsibility. You're not to blame for everything you go through, but you are called to look at what you go through as an opportunity for healing. Because the unconscious, no matter how destructive it may seem, isn't trying to hurt you. It's trying to integrate you. It's simply trying to bring you back home. The signs are everywhere, in dreams, in pain, in patterns, in encounters, in silence. But you need to stop living like a victim and start living like someone who listens. Because only those who listen can change. Only those who read the symbols can write a new story. And only those who recognize the signs of the unconscious can finally stop being controlled by it. You don't show everything you feel. You don't say everything you think. You don't always act the way you want, and that's not a flaw, it's an adaptation. From early on, you learned that in order to survive in the world, you'd have to mold yourself, be accepted, be praised, be normal. And so, little by little, you began to create a mask, a version of yourself that fits in, that pleases, that meets expectations. Carl Jung called this mask the B persona, the social face of the individual. But the problem begins when you forget it's a mask, when you start believing that this facade is all you are. And the more you identify with it, the further you drift from your essence, the more you lose yourself and live a life that feels real, but isn't. The persona is not necessarily false, it's functional. It helps you play roles, professional, parent, friend, artist, servant. It organizes your public life, your interactions, your social presence, but it comes at a cost. Because in order to function, the persona demands that you hide parts of yourself, that you suppress your pain, your anger, your strangeness, your intensity, your vulnerability, and those parts don't disappear. They gather in the unconscious. While the persona smiles, organizes, performs, the soul contracts, because everything that wasn't included in the mask collects its debt in silence. Jung said the persona is a contract with the collective, and it is necessary. The issue arises when it stops being a bridge and becomes a prison, when you start living only to maintain appearances, to avoid disappointment, to avoid confrontation, to keep acceptance. Then the symptoms appear: exhaustion, emptiness, a sense of falseness, loss of meaning. You might have success, applause, status, but still feel like something's missing and you can't name it. That something is you, your real self, buried beneath layers of performance. The persona is fed by fear. Fear of rejection, abandonment, failure. It wants you to be what they expect, to say what's convenient, to never be too much. And so you shrink, You edit yourself, you tame yourself, and the more you repeat this process, the harder it is to break free, because now you have an image to uphold, a character to sustain, people who believe you are that. But the truth is, the persona doesn't love, it performs. It doesn't surrender, it protects. And as long as you live only through the persona, you'll never truly be seen, because what's being loved isn't you, it's the mask. And here's the devastating side effect. You begin expecting others to wear masks too. You demand coherence, perfection, composure, because you can't bear to see in others what you deny in yourself. The persona creates shallow, cold relationships based on roles and exchanges, not on presence and truth. Jung said, "Where the persona rules, love disappears." 2. Because love demands exposure. It demands truth. It requires revealing the mess, the chaos, the fear, and the persona can't tolerate that. It prefers safe silence to uncomfortable truth. But that silence kills you from the inside. Dissolving the persona is a profound process. It's not about destroying your social life. It's about no longer living only shown for it. It's about looking in the mirror and saying, "What I show is not all I am." It's allowing yourself to be contradictory, imperfect, strange. It's giving voice to what the mask has silenced. It's showing up without the filter. And yes, that's scary, because the first feeling when you take off the mask is fear of rejection. But the second is relief. The relief of finally breathing as a whole being, of being loved not for what you pretend to be, but for who you really are. And here is the crucial point. No one can truly love you if all you offer is the persona. Real love begins where the mask ends, where vulnerability shows up, where the soul steps forward. And only when you allow yourself to be truly seen can you truly belong. The persona might protect you from judgment, but it also protects you from intimacy. And living without intimacy, without truth, without real connection, is not living. It's surviving. Jung invites us not to destroy the persona, but to integrate it, to use it when necessary, but never confuse it with who we are. To understand that it's useful, but that the soul begins where it ends. The process of individuation demands this rupture, this detachment from image, this courage to disappoint the world, so you no longer disappoint yourself. Because only when you stop pretending can you start being. And only those who allow themselves to be can finally live in truth. You say, "This is just how I am." But who is that I? Is it the version you show on social media, the one others expect, the one your family allowed, the one society shaped? Carl Jung would say none of those answers reach the core, because what you call you is actually a collection of layers. Persona, patterns, memories, traumas, masks, reactions. What you call identity might just be the sound of your adaptation, the reflection of your survival. The true self, the one that exists fully without fear, without conditioning, without pretense, that you haven't met yet. And maybe you're running from it without realizing. Finding the true self is one of life's most painful and most liberating tasks, because it requires dismantling everything you built to please, to protect, to fit in. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, not who you learned to be. But beware, this path isn't pretty. It involves loss, disillusionment, collapse of identity, because before you find the true self, you'll have to see who you are, not. And that moment, the moment of deconstruction, is where most people quit. The true self is not an idea, it's a presence. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to win arguments. It doesn't repeat inherited behaviors. It simply is. But to access it, you'll have to face every false version you've worn over the years. You'll have to accept that many of your choices came from fear, not desire. That many of your convictions are just emotional legacies you never questioned. That much of your personality is just trauma, dressed as style. You think you're free, but you're repeating a script. Jung said that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And the true self is buried beneath layers of denial, and it only emerges when you stop running, stop pretending, stop blaming the world, and start looking within. That's where the real journey begins. And yes, it hurts, because you'll realize that much of what you defended fiercely was just a defense, that much of what you called love was attachment, that much of what you called personality was just trauma in disguise. The true self doesn't impose, it emerges. Indeed, it shows up in the silence, in the exhaustion of pretending, in the pain of not feeling at home in your own body. It reveals itself when you drop the act, when you say enough to the image, when you accept being imperfect, ambiguous, human. The true self doesn't seek perfection. It seeks wholeness. And it can only be born in someone who is willing to embrace their broken pieces. But here's the paradox. You'll never fully be yourself while you're trying to find out who you are. Because the true self isn't something to be understood. It's something to be experienced. It's not fixed. It's not a solid identity. It moves, evolves, flows. It's a current, and you have to allow it to happen. That means letting go of control, stopping the search for labels, stopping the need to be someone, because deep down, the true self is the silence that remains when all the external voices stop screaming inside you. What blocks you from accessing it is fear. Fear of discovering you're not as good as you wanted to seem, or maybe that you're far more sensitive, deep, and intense than the world permits. Fear of not being accepted, fear of disappointing others, fear of having to change everything. But Jung was clear. You only become free when you become whole. And no one is whole while living split between what they feel and what they show, between what they desire and what they allow, between who they are and who they perform to be. This journey requires courage, courage to get lost, courage to die to the old versions of yourself, courage to not know who you are for a while, and keep going anyway, because the true self isn't found in comfort, it's found in the abyss, in that moment when you stop searching for yourself outside and start recognizing yourself within. In the instant you look into your inner mirror and instead of trying to fix yourself, you simply see. You don't know who you are, but everything inside you is begging to be discovered. And the world doesn't need another character. It needs someone brave enough to be whole. Someone who, instead of shouting to be seen, has learned how to see themselves. You believe your ideas are yours, that your values were chosen, that your fears were born from your experiences. But Carl Jung tore that belief down to its core. He claimed that a part of what you feel, think, and fear isn't individual, it's collective. Yes, there is a layer of the unconscious that goes beyond your personal history. It's a shared ancestral archetypal psychic field, a millennia-old repository of images, symbols, and patterns that shape how all of humanity perceives reality, without even knowing it. Jung called it the collective unconscious. And if you've never heard of it, that doesn't mean it's not affecting you. On the contrary, the less aware you are of it, the more power it has over you. Imagine the human mind as layered. The most superficial is consciousness, what you know, feel, and remember. Beneath that lies the personal unconscious, made up of your traumas, repressed memories, complexes. But beneath that is a deep, impersonal, universal layer. A territory where psychic structures live that belong to all of humanity. Jung called these structures archetypes. They're not just characters, they are symbolic patterns of behavior, invisible molds that guide emotions, narratives, behaviors, and even the dreams of the human species since the dawn of time. Have you ever wondered why certain stories move you so deeply, even without logical reason? Why we're drawn to hero journeys, redemption arcs, sacrifice, betrayal, motherhood, death, rebirth? That doesn't come from pop culture, it comes from within. These are ancient archetypes we recognize instinctively. The mother, the father, the wise old man, the trickster, the hero, the shadow, the lover, the warrior, the orphan, all of these images live inside you, even if you've never read a word about them, because they're part of your psychic code. They're in your emotional DNA. They are the hidden language of the human soul. But here's the most frightening part. The collective unconscious isn't just symbolic. It's active. It influences your decisions, values, perceptions, and judgments. Much of what you consider natural, obvious, right or wrong, is inherited from this collective field. You've been shaped by an invisible psychic ocean, carrying traumas from wars, ancient myths, religious structures, symbolic images, and experiences that were never yours, but live through you. And the less aware you are of it, the more controlled you are by it. Jung claimed that many modern neuroses don't have personal causes, but archetypal ones. You suffer without understanding why, because an archetype has been activated within you. For example, you enter a crisis when becoming a parent, not just due to real-life challenges, but because the parent archetype gets activated. With all its ancestral weight of expectations, sacrifices and failures accumulated over ages. Or maybe you fall into a toxic relationship and feel like you've lived this before. Maybe you have, not in this life, but in the psychic realm, where these roles repeat as universal patterns. And here's the cruel twist. The collective unconscious also carries wounds, ancient fears, images of destruction, abandonment, guilt, violence. Jung lived through 2 world wars. He watched the collective unconscious become a destructive force, fueling fanaticism, prejudice, hatred. He said evil doesn't just arise from individuals, but from archetypal possession of the collective. When crowds are overtaken by the same unconscious pattern, religious, ideological, political, they stop thinking. They act like a blind organism, driven by ancient symbolic forces, erupting to dominate culture, and the individual disappears. That's why the process of individuation is also a detachment from the collective unconscious. It's the refusal to think like the masses, to feel what the world demands, to repeat roles that aren't yours. It's beginning to ask, is this desire truly mine, or was it implanted? Is this guilt real or inherited? Is this pain from today or from millennia? The collective unconscious is the sea in which we're all submerged, but awakening begins when you realize you're wet. Freedom is not about denying the collective unconscious. It's about bringing it into awareness, understanding its symbols, recognizing its archetypes, naming its forces. Jung believed that when you identify the archetype at play, you strip it of its magic. It stops acting as fate and becomes a language. From there, you can dialogue with it, integrate it, use it as a tool, not a prison. The true self is born only when you break away from the archetypal roles that define you. When you stop being the ideal son, the perfect woman, the invincible warrior, the family martyr, and begin to exist as a singular soul. That's not selfishness, that's individuation, because no one else on earth can live what only you came here to live. But as long as you remain imprisoned in collective images of what you should be, you'll continue to exist as a copy, not a being. You carry humanity within you, the ancient dreams, the fears of the tribe, the voices of the ancestors. But that's not a curse, it's an invitation to remember that you didn't begin with yourself, and that becoming conscious means passing through these layers. And when you do, you stop reacting, stop repeating, stop living a life that's not yours, because only those who dive into the collective can emerge as individuals, and only those who break the pattern can finally write a new story. There is a force within you that, even in your darkest moments, keeps pushing you forward. Even when everything seems to collapse, even when pain devours you, even when you say, "I can't take it anymore," that force whispers, "Go." It is the impulse of the hero, but not the Hollywood kind, defeating villains with superpowers. Jung's hero is symbolic. It's the part of you with the courage to descend into the hell of the unconscious and return transformed. The hero is not the one who runs from pain, avoids the shadow, or denies the darkness. The hero walks through it all in the name of something greater, the search for the self, for wholeness, for the totality of the soul. Carl Jung mapped this path as an archetypal journey, lived by every human who dares to move beyond the surface. And it begins with a rupture. Something breaks, something collapses. A loss, an illness, a humiliation, an existential crisis. This is the call to adventure, a break from the known world. It's when you realize that living to please others is no longer enough, that the persona suffocates, that your old dreams no longer make sense. This is when life forces you to look within, and that's where the real story begins, the descent into the unconscious. Here, the hero meets the shadow, the unresolved trauma, the ancestral fear, the disowned parts of the soul. It's a confrontation with everything you tried to avoid. But it is also where transformation begins, because the hero doesn't defeat the shadow, he integrates it. He realizes that the power he was seeking outside was hiding inside the very thing he feared. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, and in that pain, the hero dies, not physically but symbolically. The fragile ego dies, the persona dies, the constructed image dies, and only after this symbolic death can the self be born." The self, for Jung, is the deepest center of the psyche, not the ego, not the conscious mind, but totality. The self is the sacred nucleus of the being, where all parts, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, reason and instinct, are reconciled. It is not a perfectionist ideal. It is a state of wholeness, of balance, of presence. It doesn't judge the parts. It embraces them. And the hero's path is, in truth, the journey through everything that separates you from yourself. But this path is dangerous because the hero can get lost, be swallowed by the unconscious, be overtaken by pain, and forget who they are. That's why Jung warned, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." The hero needs awareness, structure, symbols. Without them, diving into the unconscious can lead to madness or a spiritual bypass disguised as enlightenment. That's why the process requires firmness, time, courage, and above all, truth. Stay still. The encounter with the self is not a single moment. It is a titik process. It's realizing that you don't need to be only light. You can be storm. You don't have to be only strength. You can be fragility. You don't have to be only reason. You can be mystery. The self doesn't demand correction. It calls for acceptance. And in this realization, the hero finally understands that the true battle was never against the world, but against internal fragmentation. The war between what you are and what you show, between what you feel and what you allow. And when that war ends, the peace of being who you truly are begins. But the journey is cyclical. The hero returns, and returns transformed, calmer, clearer, less arrogant. Now he knows the enemy was never out there. It was always within, and that every monster faced was a part of him begging to be recognized. Upon returning, the hero brings no gold, no glory. He brings consciousness. And with it begins to live from a different place. A place of freedom, of wholeness, of silence. Now he can love without dependence, create without needing to prove anything, live without division. And here lies the most brutal and most beautiful truth. Every human being is a hero in potential. Every collapse is a call. Every pain is a door. Every trauma is a key. What's missing is the decision to cross, to stop running, to stop blaming, to stop living on autopilot. The self is there, whole, waiting, calling, but it only reveals itself to those brave enough to die to all that they are not. Because only those who die to the role can be reborn as soul. You fight, strive, dream, and conquer, and just when you're about to live what you always wanted, something happens. You freeze, delay, doubt yourself, complicate things, and almost invisibly, you sabotage. On the outside, it looks like everything was going well. But inside, a silent earthquake begins. Fear, guilt, shame, ancient beliefs, and suddenly, you begin to destroy the very thing you waited your whole life to experience. Carl Jung didn't see this as bad luck or weakness. He saw it as Baku, the raw power of the unconscious. Sabotage isn't logical, it's emotional. It's your inner system saying, this is too big for what you believe you deserve. You don't sabotage out of malice. You sabotage because there's a gap between what you consciously desire and what you unconsciously believe. You may want love, but if deep down you think you're unworthy, you'll push it away. You may want success, but if you carry the ancestral guilt that winners are arrogant or will be abandoned, you'll stumble at the finish line. You may crave peace, but if your system has learned that chaos is familiar, you'll find a way to start a fight. Self-sabotage is the unconscious attempt to remain loyal to the pain you know. Jung said the unconscious prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar freedom. That means even if you say you want to change, a part of you resists, because change requires leaving the role, breaking the cycle, owning your power. And to the unconscious, that's terrifying. Because back then as a child, maybe your light was punished, your voice mocked, your joy silenced. And so you learned, I can't stand out, I can't be too much, I can't be different. And that programming, even without words, became a deep command. If I am fully myself, I will be punished. Sabotage comes wrapped in the perfect excuse. You get sick, you make a mistake, you start a fight, you isolate yourself. It all seems justified, except for the truth that you're scared. Scared to shine. Scared to break the invisible contracts of your past. Because true growth is a symbolic betrayal. It means outgrowing your family's pain, surpassing the limits you were taught, saying, I am allowed to live differently. And that takes courage. It means enduring the pain of no longer belonging to your old narrative. Because the unconscious is conservative, it wants to keep things the way they are, even if it means keeping you trapped. You say you want to change, but change demands loss. Letting go of the version of you that was accepted, tolerated, recognized, and the moment you get close to real achievement, the old self begins to die. The unconscious resists. It creates symptoms, doubts, addictions, emotional compulsions. It starts screaming, it's too soon, you're not ready, this is dangerous, but all of it is defense. What your unconscious fears is not failure, it's success. Because real success means you have to carry your greatness without shame. Jung understood that healing begins when you recognize this pattern without guilt. When you say, yes, I sabotage, but that's not the end. It's the beginning of my listening. Because sabotage reveals where the wound is, where the limiting belief lives, where the part of your soul still believes it can't, that it doesn't deserve, that it doesn't know how. You don't change by force. You change by presence. You change when you stop pretending everything's fine and start talking to the part that's still hurting, the part that every time you're about to win whispers, don't go, it's not safe. And here is the deepest truth. You only stop sabotaging when you embrace the version of yourself that started hiding. Because it was in that childhood moment when you felt not good enough that a part of you froze. And that part is still alive, still waiting for permission to grow. You can't yell at it. You can't think positive over it. You have to go back, look, listen, say, I'm here. You can grow now. You can trust me. Because true healing is reparenting your soul, giving your inner child the love, the support, and the space it never had. And only then, the sabotage ends. You are not broken. You are fragmented, split between what you dream and what you fear. And sabotage is not failure. It's a cry for reconnection. When you stop running from that part, when you accept it as your own, when you integrate it, something shifts. The urge to stall dissolves. The fear lessens. Presence rises. And you begin to sustain what once seemed impossible. Because now, you are no longer alone inside yourself. No more repeating almost. No more turning away from your own light. No more ruining the most important moment. You didn't come this far to repeat your family's pain. You came to transform it, to integrate, to win without destroying yourself. And only those who have the courage to carry their greatness can finally live with truth. You think you're in love. You believe you chose that person because of connection, admiration, desire. But according to Jung, what you call love may actually be an unconscious repetition of old emotional patterns. And that changes everything. Because love, or what you believe is love, may not be a conscious choice, but rather a psychic script you're merely acting out. And here's the brutal truth. You fall in love not with who the other person truly is, but with who they awaken inside you. Relationships are mirrors, and what they reflect is often your original wound. Jung said that when you enter a relationship, you don't just bring your body and ideas. You bring your wounded child, unresolved complexes, shadow fears, and unmet needs. And the other person does the same. That's when the drama begins. Two people trying to complete each other, using the very parts they've spent their lives hiding. Passion is a psychic phenomenon you let project onto the other to do what you lost, what you lacked, what you haven't yet integrated, and you fall for that projection. But sooner or later, the illusion breaks, and then you see the other as they really are, and you panic, you suffer, you say they changed, but the truth is, you woke up. Relationships ruled by the unconscious are cyclical. You attract the same kind of person, the same dynamics, the same sense of abandonment, rejection, control, manipulation. It doesn't matter the name or the face. The script repeats because it hasn't been resolved. And here's the most cruel part. You confuse familiarity with love. You mistake known pain for connection, emotional chaos for passion, and then you call chemistry what is really emotional programming. You're not loving. You're repeating patterns. Why does this happen? Because the unconscious seeks integration. It wants to heal the wound, and it uses the other person as a mirror, as a trigger, as a tool. You think you're living a love story, but you're actually living a subconscious attempt to reunite with the forgotten part of yourself. The child who was never validated, the teen who was silenced, the fragment of your soul still crying out, "See me, love me, choose me." And if the other person responds to that hidden cry, even if painfully, you become attached. Because deep down, you don't just want love, you want healing. Jung warned of the dangers of unconscious fusion. When two people relate through lack and projection, they create a symbiotic field where no one truly sees the other. You expect to be saved, they expect the same, but no one can do that. Because what's missing is not out there, it's within. And as long as you don't take ownership of your part in the story, you'll keep blaming the other for a pain they only reflected. No one causes your wound, they just touch it. Unconscious relationships also breed dependence. Because if the other person leaves, you lose access to the part of your soul you projected onto them. Then comes the existential void, the collapse, the desperation. But that's not love. It's the loss of symbolic access to your own wholeness. Jung said that the only way to truly love is through individuation. In other words, when two whole, conscious, healing people meet, they don't complete each other. They overflow. And from that overflow, real connection is born. Not from need but from good choice. But to get there, you must break the fantasy. The fantasy that someone will give you what your parents didn't. The fantasy that love will heal your emptiness. The fantasy that the right person will save you from your pain. That's not love, and that's organized emotional dependency. And all dependency leads to imprisonment. Because as long as you rely on another to feel worthy, you will live in fear. Fear of loss, fear of not being enough, fear of betrayal, fear of abandonment. And people living in fear don't love, they protect themselves. And constant protection prevents surrender. Healing begins when you say, I attracted this, I allowed this, I repeated this, but now I want to see. When you recognize that the relationship isn't failing, it's revealing what still needs to be integrated within you. Then you begin to ask, what part of me chose this dynamic? What does this relationship reveal about what I believe I deserve? What wound is being triggered here? And why does it hurt so much? The ideal relationship is not one that protects you from pain, but one that awakens your healing, that challenges you to grow, that pulls you out of the victim role and into emotional responsibility. Because loving consciously demands presence, listening, seeing the other without the filter of your own story. And that's only possible when you first looked at yourself. You are not condemned to repeat, but until you examine the programming behind your choices, you'll keep entering relationships that drain more than they free. Jung would ask, you love, but who is choosing? The conscious adult or the wounded child? That answer changes everything, because only those with the courage to choose themselves can finally love without losing themselves. You search for meaning. You crave something greater, deeper, truer. You pray, meditate, light candles, read scriptures, ask for signs, plead for answers. And all of this feels spiritual, but for Carl Jung, much of what you call spirituality may actually be your unconscious in disguise. A subtle, desperate attempt by the psyche to explain what it cannot comprehend and control what it fears. Jung did not deny spirituality, quite the opposite. But he was one of the first to boldly suggest that in many cases the God you seek is just a projection of your fear. Yes, the image you have of the divine may not come from the divine itself, but from your unconscious. You believe in a punishing God. You may be projecting the rigid paternal authority you experienced in childhood. You feel that God abandons you when you fail. You may be reliving the emotional neglect you suffered from those who should have embraced you. You think you must earn spiritual love. You may be trapped in an archetype of inherited guilt. Jung said that humans project their unconscious onto the heavens and then call it revelation. Tutum. That doesn't invalidate the spiritual experience. It purifies it. Because until you remove those projections, you're not relating to the divine, you're negotiating with your shadow. Unconscious spirituality doesn't set you free. It imprisons you. It says you must pay, suffer, prove, that there is karma punishing you, that something is inherently wrong with you, and thus it becomes just another mirror of your trauma. You exchange human judgment for divine condemnation. You replace external control with metaphysical guilt. You swap social cages for mystical servitude, but your soul remains locked because when the sacred is used to avoid pain, it becomes poison. Jung saw the true spiritual path as an inner movement, not one of escape, but of integration. God, for him, was a symbol of the self, the totality of the psyche, the point where all contradictions meet. Real spirituality begins when you stop begging something outside of you to fix what's broken within. When instead of praying to be saved, you descend into your own soul and say, "I accept to see." When instead of asking for a miracle, you face your own chaos. Because only those who walk through the desert and find the sacred. Many seek spirituality as a form of escape. They run from trauma, from pain, from emotional responsibility, from the shadow, from solitude. And they dress up that escape in beautiful robes, retreats, doctrines, chakras, meditations. But it's still escape because there was no confrontation. Jung called this spiritual inflation. The ego disguises itself as enlightened to avoid facing the psychic garbage pile, but what is denied returns. And the more you try to be pure, the more your unconscious sabotages your life from the shadows. True spirituality is not light, it is dense. Indeed, it's not about enchantment, it's about stripping down. You'll have to lose the image of God that was built to control you. You'll have to stare into the void that separates you from the mystery. You'll have to admit that much of what you called faith was a fear in disguise. And when you do that, something extraordinary happens. The divine stops being a punitive father and becomes an fey inner space of truth, silence, and wholeness. The sacred stops residing in the heavens and starts living in your gaze, your body, your presence. Jung said that only what is completely ours can be truly spiritual. This means you must first descend into the hell of your soul. Before you can rise to the heaven of awareness, you must include your anger, your shame, your desire, your pain. You must stop trying to be good and start being whole. Because God, in the highest sense, doesn't want you to pretend. God wants you to know yourself. And the encounter with the divine is not a relief for those who hide. It is a rebirth for those with the courage to die to everything they are not. This is the spirituality that transforms, the one that starts in collapse, in silence, in the moment when you stop asking and start listening. In the instant you say, "Whatever dwells within me, I accept to look." And then what was fear becomes a portal. What was pain becomes a path, and what was unconscious is revealed as sacred presence. You don't need more doctrine. You need truth. You need soul. You need courage to abandon the idea of an external God who punishes and embrace the possibility that the divine dwells within you. But this inner God only appears when you stop running from your own darkness. Because only those who pass through the shadow can find the light that never lies. You think everything is falling apart. A relationship ends. A door closes. Your health falters. Your plans crumble. And you ask, why is this happening to me? But Carl Jung, with his brutal symbolic honesty, would offer another answer. It's not happening to you. It's happening for you. Because collapse, which you interpret as injustice, might be the only possible path to true transformation. Chaos is a teacher, and like every true teacher, it teaches by breaking. It teaches by breaking, because only what shatters can be rebuilt in a more authentic form. Jung once said, "To meet yourself is to meet your shadow, and to meet the shadow is to collapse your world." When everything is going well, you don't look inside. You keep going. Repeating, adjusting, wearing the persona, living on autopilot, performing roles, but the soul does not settle. And when it senses that you are lost, living a life that isn't yours, it begins to scream. At first softly, insomnia, anxiety, apathy, then louder, failures, losses, ruptures. And if you still don't listen, it brings everything down, not out of cruelty, but out of love. Because chaos is the only language the unconscious knows to stop a lie that's lasted too long. Life breaks you not because it hates you, but because it knows you. because it knows that without cracking the shell, you'll never see what's inside, that without losing everything you thought you were, you'll never discover who you truly are. And here lies the most beautiful brutality of all this pain. Collapse is an invitation, a passage, a symbol, whether it's a financial ruin, a betrayal, an illness, or a loss. Every collapse carries the same hidden message. It's time for you to be reborn. But to be reborn, you must first die. Not physically, but in your image, in your rigidity, in your fixed idea of how life should be. Jung said that the self, the totality of the being, cannot emerge as long as the ego is in control. And the ego doesn't surrender willingly. It must be broken, dismantled, and that hurts. It hurts because you mistake the ego for yourself. And when it shatters, you think you are ending. But in truth, you're just beginning. Pain is not the end. It's the door. It's the baptism. Chaos doesn't invent pain. It reveals it. It tears away what's already dead. It exhumes the parts of you that have been buried. It exposes wounds you've spent your life hiding. It shows you that you've been living in a house built on lies, that you've been selling yourself for emotional crumbs, that you've been trying to control what needs to be released. And once you see that, chaos changes its name. It's no longer punishment, it's liberation. But that only happens if you have the courage to walk through it. Most people try to run. They want to go back to how things were, to rebuild everything as before, to pretend nothing happened. But doing that means missing the chance to change, because chaos doesn't destroy what's true. It destroys what you thought you had to be in order to deserve to exist. And that character must die, so the soul can finally have space, so the self can be born. The journey is solitary, because no one can cross your collapse for you, but that doesn't mean you're alone. It means your soul is guiding you. The deep intelligence of the unconscious is rearranging everything, and as much as it feels like the end, it's the beginning of a new center. Jung said the self acts as a compensatory archetype. When the ego is lost, the self rises to restore balance. But that restoration isn't soft, it's symbolic. It requires that you trust, even without seeing the path. And here lies the fiercest and most redemptive truth. Chaos doesn't want your destruction, it wants your truth. It wants to see who you are without the titles, the masks, the inherited fears. It wants you to realize you can live without applause, without control, without guarantees, because it's there in the center of nothing that something new is born, something that doesn't depend on the world, that doesn't fear the end, that doesn't need to be validated. The self, the soul, the true you, and finally a life with meaning. You're not being punished, you're being awakened, and whoever has the courage to walk through this fire never comes back the same. Because once you see yourself clearly in the mirror of chaos, you finally understand. Everything I thought was destroying me was actually setting me free. After facing the collapse, after confronting the shadow, after recognizing the sabotage, the addiction, the persona, the complexes, the mirrors, the losses, the fears, comes the inevitable question, now what? How do I go on? How do I rebuild something real inside me now that I've seen who I truly am, with everything heavy, ugly, beautiful, broken? Carl Jung offered no magic path. He didn't believe in quick fixes or instant redemption. What he taught was long, arduous, intimate. He called it integration. And integration means in every sense. Stop running from yourself. The human psyche is composed of opposites, light and shadow, reason and impulse, love and fear, masculine and feminine, life and death. The ego tries to pick a side, tries to be only what society accepts. But the self, the deep soul, does not want one side. It wants wholeness. And that wholeness can only form when you gather within yourself everything you once rejected. Integration, then, is not evolution. It's a return, a symbolic return to the parts that were exiled. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That's it. Making conscious what was denied, and only then becoming whole. To integrate is not to fix, not to improve yourself, not to correct the soul. To integrate is to listen to pain without rejecting it. To look at fear and not ask it to go away. To feel anger and ask what it's trying to say. To recognize jealousy, pride, and neediness, and instead of fighting them, open space to understand their roots. Because everything you feel serves a function. It exists for a reason. And when you stop fighting your own inner content, it ceases to be the enemy. It becomes an ally. Jung understood that every symptom is a symbol, every crisis is a message, every repetition is an invitation to awareness. And the first step in the integration process is to listen without judgment. Listen to your body, your dreams, your impulses, your reactions, not as signs of failure, but as bridges, as psychic languages, as paths back to parts of the soul that were excluded. The child you once were, the teenager who wasn't heard, the adult who had to pretend. They all live inside you, they all want to be seen, and they all carry pieces of your true self. The second step is to dialogue with those fragments. Jung developed a technique called active imagination, a way of letting the unconscious express itself symbolically and creatively. You close your eyes. You bring forth an emotion, an image, a part of yourself, and you ask, "Who are you? What do you want to tell me? What do I need to see?" It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary, because for the first time, you're speaking with the part you used to fight. And this dialogue begins to dissolve the internal division, begins to restore presence, begins to heal. The third step is to endure ambiguity, because integration means including opposites, accepting that you can love and feel anger, want to come closer and still fear it, trust and still doubt. The dualistic mind wants certainty, but the soul wants space. Jung said, "Individuation happens when you can hold the tension of opposites without running to easy answers." And this demands maturity. It means staying in the fire of doubt, contradiction, and uncertainty until something deeper emerges, the true center of consciousness. And the final step is to live from that center. It means acting with awareness, choosing with presence, speaking with truth, relating without projection, serving without self-erasure, creating without performance, living without so much protection. It's not perfection, not a final state. It's a way of being, a way of walking through the world, knowing there are no more parts of you left behind, that you don't need to pretend or please or hide, because now you are whole. Integration is the work of a lifetime, and there are no shortcuts, because every part you've denied demands return, demands listening, demands presence. And yes, it's exhausting, it takes energy, but what you get in return is non-negotiable. Peace, clarity, freedom, not the childish freedom of doing whatever you want, but the adult freedom of no longer being a slave to yourself. Jung gave us this map, not a paved path, but a direction, a compass, a radical demand. Look at everything, accept everything, include everything, because only those who include can transcend, and only those who transcend can finally live a life with soul. You say you are free, that you make your own decisions, that you choose your path. But Carl Jung, with his illusion-shattering precision, would warn you, real freedom is not doing what you want. It's understanding who is wanting. Because if the one who desires is the trauma, the complex, the fear, the neediness, the projection, then your so-called freedom is just a well-rehearsed play. The greatest prison is the one you call will, a will shaped by the unconscious, a will that seems to be yours, but actually belongs to the part of you you've never dared to face. Jung said, "Everything that we do not face in ourselves we will encounter as fate. You think you choose, but you repeat. You think you decide, but you react. You think you live, but you perform. What controls you is not what you see. It's what you avoid seeing. It's what you buried so deep that you no longer recognize it as yours. And while these forces operate in the dark, there is no freedom. There is programming. You fall in love with the same types, sabotage at the same points, run away at the same thresholds, break down every time change gets close, and you call it bad luck, or fate, or someone else's fault. But the truth is, it's you, or rather, it's a part of you that you don't yet know. The unconscious is not a resting place. It's an invisible operating system running all the time. It creates addictions, obsessions, paralyzing beliefs. It manipulates your gaze, your desire, your body. And the most brutal part, it doesn't need your permission, because as long as it remains unconscious, it rules. And you, unknowingly, obey. Like an actor who didn't write the script, but believes he's improvising. Freedom is a comfortable myth when the soul is split. Because freedom only exists where there is awareness, and awareness only arises where there is courage to see. Jung didn't offer comfort, he offered responsibility. He said the true journey is not about changing the world, it's about illuminating yourself, because the world you see is a reflection of the mind you have, the people who hurt you, the patterns that repeat, the limitations that surround you. All of it is a mirror of your unhealed story, a mirror of your unintegrated shadow, a mirror of your forgotten soul. And as long as you try to fix the world outside without turning inward, you're only reinforcing your prison. Because what traps you isn't out there. Look honestly at your life. What patterns do you repeat? What wounds never heal? What excuses do you keep telling yourself? Where do you self-sabotage? Where do you freeze? Where do you lie? These are your chains, and they won't be broken by willpower, motivational quotes, or self-help books. They only dissolve through awareness. And awareness requires an act of radical courage. To stop running, to stop blaming, to stop chasing external fixes, and to begin looking at what embarrasses you, at what you hide, at what you can't stand about yourself. And when you do look, something changes, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. You begin to recognize your triggers, to slow your reactions, to listen to the body, to read the symbols, to take a stand with truth, to say no without guilt, to say yes without fear. You finally begin to live from the center, not from the wound. That is freedom. Freedom from sabotage, freedom from repetition, freedom from dependency, freedom from pretending. It's not a loud freedom, it's a silent one, internal, deep, sacred. Carl Jung gave the world a map, not of enlightenment, but of wholeness. And wholeness demands that you look at everything, include everything. Remember that the part of you you most reject is the one that most needs love, and the content that most frightens you is the one that will most set you free. You can go on believing you are in control, or you can begin right now to see who is really pulling the strings of your life. That choice is yours, and it changes everything. Because in the end, you won't be free when you have everything, or when you understand everything, or when you are perfect. You'll be free when you stop running from yourself. And if you have the courage to do that, you won't need approval or scripts or applause or roles anymore. You'll be able at last to live in peace with what is, not with what others expected you to be. And that is the freedom no one can give you, but only you can choose.